Following the Sculpting 101, the making of Sharky, I want to share with you my second step-by-step sculpting tutorial, the making of Grumpy Frog, referenced by the talented artist Marion Carnazza. This is part of the Starting Simple series, so grab your stylus if you want to follow along and let's get to it. Hello everyone, I'm Nemesis from Ngo85. Welcome to my channel. In this new video tutorial, paying attention to the feedback, I'm slowing down so the information can be easier to digest. I have divided the tutorial in 3 videos to cover the blockout, sculpting and painting instead of having just a very long single video. For this first part, we will cover the mindset and planning, a short part on preparation, and finally we will work on the blockout of our model. In the description, you will find the timestamps for each section of the video as well as the links for the reference and add-ons. The only thing you need to know is how to navigate in Blender and some basic knowledge of the sculpting tools. As a disclaimer, I'm not a professional, but just an artist who loves to sculpt in Blender and finds sharing what he learns very rewarding. With this out of the way, let's get to work. If you already watched my making of Sharky tutorial, you know that I'm not seeking for perfection. Yes, I want to respect the reference and make it as similar as possible, but I also try not to stress myself since my main goal here is to enjoy my time sculpting while improving at the same time. Having this mindset prevents me from feeling discouraged if things don't go as planned and allows me to understand that there is a lot of learning in failing as well. I like to begin my projects doing a bit of a planning and studying the reference. In this case, I have the image open in Clip Studio Paint. The first thing I would like to check from my reference is the symmetry. Looking at the petals of the flower on top, I can see that there is no symmetry, but I would like to check the body as well. I have added a mirror, and as I mentioned and we can clearly see, there is no symmetry on the top. To deal with this issue, I'm planning to make one petal and just duplicate the rest. Moving to the body, I can also see that there is not much symmetry. For instance, the distance between the arms at the bottom. Also, using the top of the leg as reference, we see that it's not in the same position compared to the other side. To deal with this, I will focus on one side as my symmetry point, meaning that my adjustments are to fall in place with that side, in this case the right one. I could have cropped the image, duplicated and flipped the remaining side to have a symmetrical reference, but I do not want to mess much with the flower on top, and I also consider that my approach should be enough. Next thing I would like to plan are the shapes to be used. Starting from the petals, I consider that a plane with some subdivisions and a solidify modifier should be enough to obtain the shape quickly. Then we can add a mirror modifier or duplicate to get the rest of the petals. The petals are not in the same place or having the same shape, but I will not worry about that in the beginning as it can easily be adjusted later. This stick shape can be easily done with a cylinder. For the eyes, the most obvious are spheres or subdivided cubes. For the body, we have this egg shape that will be done with a sphere. The arms will be divided in 2 parts and 2 spheres or subdivided cubes should be enough for this. The legs are being covered, so we will need to guess the shape, but we can also achieve this using spheres similar to the arms. For this I will be using 2. For the hands shape, we do not have the best visibility in order to trace on them, but with some subdivided cubes or regular spheres for the hands and fingers should be fine. For the feet, I will make a triangular shape and add the toes in the same manner as for the fingers. That's it for the shapes. We will use planes, cylinders and lots of spheres. Let's talk about the environment and the position of the reference. Bearing in mind that we can see the top of the flower and the top of the leaf where the frog is sitting on, we can tell that this is not straight, but the viewer is looking at an angle. We will work in a straight position and then this can be adjusted later with the camera. For the environment, I will only make the leaf under the frog, so I will not be making the grass at the back or the water. This will cover for my planning, and now we can move to Blender to work on the preparations for our sculpting. Now it's time to prepare our workspace and the reference. Just for your information, I'm using Blender 4.0. At the left corner, you will see the keys I press, but I will try to mention every key so you can focus more on what is being done to the model than the keys I pressed. The first thing I like to do is to come to the front orthographic view, pressing 1 in the numpad or pressing the tilde key to get the pie menu. This way, when I place the reference, it's already straight and in a good position. Pressing Shift A, I click on Image and then Reference and navigate to where my image is located. Now we can see the image in the viewport. Normally, I keep my references in a separate folder, but since we only have one image, I will leave it as it is. From Clip Studio, we already knew that the image is not symmetrical, so I will focus more on the right side while sculpting, but we need to position the reference as close to the center as possible, so I will be using the Z-axis as a guide, but to better see the line, I will go to Data, check the box for opacity, and drop this one until we can better see the axis line. With the image selected, I press G to move, followed by X to constrain the movement to the X-axis, and hold Shift so I can move it slowly. I'm looking at the stem of the flower and in between the eyes to get the closest to the center. I think this is good, so I will do a left mouse click to confirm. Having placed my image in the right position, I want to make sure not moving it accidentally, so in the outliner I disable the selection. If you don't see this, just click on the filter and look for the selection icon. Since I only have a front view reference, I want to make sure that I only see it from that view, so I uncheck the box for perspective, and now I can see only the image from the orthographic view. Next thing I like to do is to have the image in front of the mesh, so I mark the front option in here. To quickly show you what I mean with this, I will add a sphere. As you can see, the object is in front of the image reference, but if I go to the data menu and click front, now the image will be in front of the reference, making it easier when we start tracing. I will just play a bit with the opacity. I can now get rid of the object. The last thing I will do for the sake of keeping things organized is to rename my reference. You can also do this by selecting the object and press F2. This concludes our preparation, and we can now begin with the blockout of the model. For this model, we will begin with the body being the biggest piece in the character and of course the one holding the rest of the body parts. For this, I decided to use spheres since even being low poly, they have a good number of vertices allowing more control during the sculpting. I will bring it down pressing G, then Z to constrain the movement to the Z-axis and place it close to the middle of the model. I resize it using S to scale. When you do this type of operations like scaling, to avoid issues later in which the brush displays a stretched shape, it is always good to apply such transformation. Press Ctrl A and in this case I apply the scale. I move to the sculpt mode to begin shaping the body. Then I switch to the front view. As I mentioned, I will focus on the right side of the model while sculpting, but first, let's enable the symmetry so we just need to work on one side. I change the size of the brush by pressing F, and I start moving the mesh into place based on the reference. When I work in orthographic view during this stage of the model, I like to change the fall off shape to projected. For this, I go to fall off and press on projected. What this does is that all the points or verts in my view are going to be influenced by the brush, so whatever I'm doing to the front, it will be somewhat replicated onto the back of the model. I come to the side view and start doing some adjustments. We don't have a reference for the side view, so we can just use our imagination to model this part, trying to make something that works. I move to the front to continue shaping the model. Remember, I use the tilde key to use the pie menu and change the orientation. To have more visibility while tracing, I like to use matte caps. In the matte cap menu, this one in particular is great for shaping your mesh over the reference. Then I just continue with my adjustments. This is my first shape for the blockout, so I can now switch back my matte cap. If you watch any of my other videos, you will have seen me using a lot this add-on. It is called Sculpt plus Paint Wheel, and it is by far my favorite sculpting add-on for Blender. I use it to quickly switch brushes and other settings. All the brushes are on the side, but for me this is more efficient. For the next shape, I will work on the eyes, and these ones can be done as well using spheres. Shift A again to add my object. Then S to scale and press G to move it in place. To replicate the shape, I will press S to scale but constrain it to the Z axis and do a left click to confirm. I go to the side view to check the position. This looks good. Now it's time to add a mirror, but I would like to show you how I like to work with this modifier. I like to have an empty object to be used as a target for my mirror. I do this so I know my mirror will be always influenced by an object that I'm not planning to move, so I do not have any weird mirroring later. So with Shift A, I add an empty. From there, I like to name it, pressing F2. Once it has a name, I hide the empty. Now I can select the sphere and add the mirror modifier, and in the object I search for the empty. And as you can see, I have mirrored my object, and again, I will not be moving the empty at all, so I know I will not have any mirroring issues due to transformations or because I move the object being used as a target and so on. I go back, and the reason is because as default, every time I open Blender, I already have an empty saved as mirror for every time it's required. You can save this type of preferences, go into File and Default and set it as a default file. Before I continue, something I like to do is to duplicate the spheres to make my eyes with the same shape. First, with Shift D, I can duplicate the object, then do a left click to confirm, and from there I press S to scale to make it a bit smaller. To keep them organized and not mess with them, I press F2 and rename them, then I can hide the object. Now we can begin tweaking the eyes, but first let's apply the scale with Ctrl A. Back to Sculpt mode. Since I have a mirror modifier, I do not need to activate the symmetry. Let's change the matte cap. As you can see, I do not have to do a lot of changes for this one. I want to do some work on the body, and since we are in Sculpt mode, just position the cursor on top of the mesh you want to work with and press Alt Q to quickly change objects. Now I can do some minor adjustments. Don't forget to save from time to time. Back in object mode, we can start working on the arms, so again with Shift A I will add a UV sphere. S to scale to make it smaller and then press G to move it in place. Now I will scale it but in the Z axis to get something closer to the length of the arm. I want to make the arm thinner but retaining the current height. To achieve this, I press S to scale, but then with Shift Z, I can constrain on all the axes but the Z one. I can now rotate pressing R and move it to check if the size is correct. I will make it a bit smaller, scaling in the Z-axis, but since I rotated the shape, the axis uses the global one and we need the local one based on the rotation. To do this, we press S, then Z for the global and Z again to scale in the local axis. Then I can make it smaller just a bit. Time to add a mirror, but before I do, just a piece of advice. When working, you always want to be as efficient as possible. This is why I use Addons, and I believe you should as well. The one I will show you now is called Pie Menu Editor, and as the name suggests, it's used to edit pie menus in Blender. When adding a mirror, we went to the modifier panel, search for the mirror modifier, then search for the mirror object, and this will set our modifier the way we want. Within the Pie Menu Editor, I already have a saved option that does these steps with one click by adding the mirror with the target object included. For this video, I will continue using vanilla Blender for most things, but I wanted to show you this because you may see me using it from time to time and because I think it will be beneficial for you to know about it. Let's apply the scale with Ctrl A, but for this I will use the Pie menu. If you watch my video on peripherals, you know I work with a PS3 navigation controller, and my goal is to use the keyboard the least possible, and that is why I rely on these add-ons. Back in Sculpt mode, I begin tweaking the shape. Coming to the side view, the arms seem to be in good place, but I would like to move the eyes forward. Pressing Alt Q with the cursor on the eyes, I select them. If we scroll down in the tool panel, we will find the Move tool and we can change the position. With the grab brush, I continue adjusting the shape of the arms. I do not want to keep the arms straight, so let's move to object mode to rotate them. I change the matte cap. Having the origin in the middle of the object may not be ideal for the rotation. The best way will be to move the origin point to the shoulder area. In front view, I will click on Options and check Origins. Then in the toolbar, select the Move tool. Now I can move the origins pressing G and place it at the point where I want my rotation to happen. I can now switch off the origins and get back to my selection tool. From this view, I press R and I can have the rotation coming from the shoulder. Looking good. Let's now make the forearms. I will select the arms and duplicate them pressing Shift D, and I will move them to the side and do a left click to confirm. I want the forearms to be thicker like in the reference. To do this, the first thing I want to do is to reset the rotation of the object by pressing Alt R. Now I need to scale the object to make it thicker, but I do not want this to happen from the current origin point. To solve this, I will do a right click and go to Set Origin and select Origin to Center of Mass. Now my origin is in the middle and the scaling will be done from this point. I don't think I want to make it longer, so if you remember, as we did before, I will press S to scale followed by Shift Z to constrain the scale in all the axes excluding Z, and I can pull to make it thicker. Let's put them in place with G to move and R to rotate. They are a bit longer, so let's fix this. Press S to scale, then Z, but we press it again to constrain based on the local axis. I now move it with G and Z twice to do it in the local axis. Same as before, I will move the origin point for my rotation. From the side view, pressing 3 in the numpad, I press R to rotate and move it with G. In the front view, I see that the end of the forearm is not matching with the reference, so I will rotate with R and press X to do it along this axis. I like it where it is, so Ctrl A and apply the scale. And go back to Sculpt mode. I will tweak this object a bit, but because it's not straight, I will change the fall of shape back to sphere. I make the brush bigger with F and start shaping. Pressing Shift, you can smooth, but be careful as you may end up removing all the changes done. I just continue pushing and pulling to match the reference. I'm done with the arms, so I go back to object mode to begin working on the legs. Shift A and add a sphere and scale it, then move it with G. To make it longer, I scale along the Z axis, and again with S to scale and Shift Z, I can make it a bit thinner. Now I can rotate it and move it in place. Let's scale it in the local axis to make it longer. So S, then Z twice, then I move it in the local axis with G, Z, Z. From the side view, I move the legs since I want them to be behind the arms. So press G, then Y to move it. We have to bear in mind the balance of the character. With the size of the front and the leg where it is, this will most probably fall forward. So with R, I will rotate to bring the connection to the body more to the center so it makes more sense. Please remember that we are not covering any rigging or posing, so all these parts will later be joined together. Let's mirror the object, and for this I will use the mirror I have set in the Pi add-on, but you already know how to do it. From here I can press Shift D to duplicate. Same as with the arms, I want to make some adjustments, so with Alt R I will reset the rotation and start tweaking. From the side view, I will rotate. They are looking good, so let me select the object, and holding Shift, I will select the other one and press Ctrl A to apply the scale on both at once. Back in Sculpt mode, and just as before, I will push the mesh into place. Let's switch the matte cap for visibility. Change to the other mesh with Alt Q. And the same, just moving the mesh trying to match the reference. Remember to always move the object and work from different angles. I continue changing from one mesh to the other when required. I like how it looks at this point, so let's move to object mode and don't forget to save. Time to work on the flower stem, and we will do this with the obvious shape, a cylinder. If you go to this menu at the bottom, you can adjust the vertices. In this case, a 32 is fine. Let's make it smaller with S, then thinner with S followed by Shift Z. Move it with G, then Z. I want to move up just the top, so I will go to face mode, and remember, you get here from the top menu or pressing tab, but I will use the machine tools add-on. On the top left, you will have the different modes, and you can press 1, 2 or 3 to quickly switch from one to the next. In face selection mode, select the top face, and from the front view, I press G, then Z and move it. I think here is fine. I want to check if this is a good position, so I will select the top and the body and press the slash key to isolate these two pieces, and now I can move it to find that sweet spot. At the end, I feel that where it was is fine. We can now work on the petals. I changed the matte cap, and with Shift A, I will create a plane. Now I can subdivide it with Ctrl 1 or any other number. I think I will do 3 subdivisions and head to edit mode. From the top view, I will press / to focus only on the plane. So let's first scale this along the x-axis. With Ctrl R, I can add a loop and start moving to begin getting that petal shape. Selecting the other side, I can make it longer with G and Y. Then I can scale it in the X to make it smaller at the back. With Ctrl R, I add a new loop in the middle and continue to tweak the back and front of the petal. What we can do now is add the curvature. So from the side view, I will select the middle edge and then press Alt-S and start moving. This is the shrink and flatten tool, but I'm using the shortcut. I continue doing this in different edges until I get the shape I want. For thickness, I will add a solidify modifier, and I like to test the variations from changing the position of the modifiers, but in this case, I just bring back the subdivision to the top and adjust the thickness of the solidify modifier. Back in object mode, I press the slash key to bring back the rest of the objects. I will adjust it as it is too big right now, but first I move it up and from the top view I scale the object. Compared to the reference, this is a good size. From the side view, I will bring it forward and adjust the overall position. As I mentioned in the beginning, the reference is in perspective and is non-symmetrical, so I will just keep it as it is now and do my adjustments later. From the top view, with 7 in the numpad, I will move the origin of the object. For the petals, I duplicate with Shift D, as well as adding a mirror modifier and just rotate eyeballing everything. Since these are operations we have done before, let's speed up this part. I really like how they look, but of course they are too big, so I proceed to select them all and press S to scale. Then I quickly do Ctrl A and apply the scale. Later I can do a fixing to the petals to make them look better, as well as adding a connection to the stem. It is time to work on the feet. In the reference it is not too clear, so we have to find our own ways to approach this, and the first thing you should do is to look for references. Once you have a clear idea, it is time to pick a shape. I thought about using a plane to shape the contour, but then I decided to go with a UV sphere and scale it in the Z-axis to make it flatter and do my adjustments in Sculpt mode. In Sculpt mode, I will switch to the top view and change the fall of shape to projected. This time I will use the Sculpt wheel add-on. Then I turn on the X symmetry and begin shaping the object. I want some sort of triangular shape. I think this is good start, so in object mode I can position the object. This is just moving and rotating while looking at the object from different angles. When looked from the back, I can see that it's too big and it also should be connected to the lower part of the leg, so I move it with G on the X-axis. Now in front view, I can scale it to make it smaller and move it in place. With Ctrl A, I apply the scale and go to Sculpt mode to do more work on the shape. Since I'm not working now from the orthographic view, I switch the fall of shape back to sphere. I make this part of the foot smaller because I figured that what is actually long are the toes based on other references. I tried to move it in Sculpt mode, but due to the symmetry I could not, so I moved to object mode and do it from there. This is better. Let's go back to Sculpt mode to make the toe more flat. I mirrored the foot to the other side. Not 100% sure about the position, so let's do some rotation. Let's add a cube to work on the toes and add 3 subdivision levels. With S, I will make it smaller and then apply the scale with Ctrl A and go to face mode. First, I will make it longer by scaling on the X-axis. For now, I want to make it a bit flat on top and bottom, so with Ctrl R, I can add some support loops and these ones will make the mesh flatter. Then pressing A to select the whole object, I scale it, but this time on the Z-axis. From top view, we have this curved shape, but we will add more loops to make it more straight and then we can manipulate the vertices. In vertex mode, I press Alt Z to enter to the X-ray mode. This way, when I select from this view, I can select the vertices at the bottom of the object as well. With the vertices selected, I scale in Y. Now I add a new loop with Ctrl R and scale it. Then I select the ones at the end and play with them to make the shape a bit more round. I think this is a good base for the toes, so let's head to Object mode. Alt Z to exit the X-ray mode. With G, I bring down the object. From the bottom view, I can begin scaling and positioning the toe, but you know already that I will move the origin. I want to narrow the object on the sides, so I press S then Y twice to do it on the local Y axis. Time to go to the front view and position the mesh to match with the reference. Back in the bottom view, I select the toe and press Shift D to duplicate, and again, this is just more adjustments moving and scaling. I do the same to create the third toe. Let's pick our helpful matte cap and select the objects and move them into the right position. Now I will select the toes and apply the subdivision. You can apply the modifiers from the modifier panel, but I like to press Ctrl A and click on Visual Geometry to mesh. Now it is applied for all the objects. I select them all again to apply the scale, and as you might have guessed already, I will add a mirror modifier. With the mirror added, let's tweak a bit more here and there. In Sculpt mode, with the fall of shape back to sphere, I will begin pushing and pulling the mesh until I get the shape I'm looking for. I think this is good. Before I start working on the hands, I will work on the shape of the arms a bit. I want the wrist part to be more narrow. So let's work on the hands with Shift A to add a sphere and scale it, then on the Z to bring the top and bottom closer. Here I'm doing a lot of guessing and looking at references for ideas. I continue adjusting the mesh. From the bottom, I move the object closer to where the wrist is supposed to be. Apply the scale. The position is odd, so I will come from the bottom view and adjust it to have a more natural position based on the arms. I can now work on the shape of the hand in Sculpt mode. From the side view, I bring down the front part of the hand. I bring down the palm to make it touch the ground to be more convincing. I will add a mirror, but I will do it the vanilla way so it serves as a refresher for you guys. Remember, I have a hidden empty object used as mirror target. With Shift A, I add a sphere and scale it with S to make it very small and bring it down with G and apply the scale. I go to the side view to move the mesh to the right place, but since I'm sculpt mode, I will just use the move tool from here. With the grab brush and the symmetry on, I can start working on the shape of the finger. I bend the top a bit to mimic the reference. Let's adjust the palm. I think this is a good base for the fingers, so I can go back to object mode and start doing some duplication. First, I will position the origin point so all my duplicates will have the same point of transformation. Now I will deviate a bit from the reference since I want the position of the finger to follow the rest of the hand. With Shift D, I start duplicating and then I can rotate and move the fingers into position. From the bottom view, I move this finger, which would be the thumb. Now I work on the little finger and from there I can begin adjusting the rest of the fingers. I like how they look, and from here we can adjust them further in sculpt mode. I will add a mirror modifier, but let's do it differently this time. If you go to Preferences and Addons and then type Copy, you can enable this Copy Attributes menu. Now I can select all the fingers, and as I know I have many parts with mirrors, I can select one of them as the last one to make it the active object, and you can see that the color is different. Then I can do Ctrl C and copy the attribute I want. In this case, I need to copy the modifiers. And as you can see, now I have a mirror in all the fingers without having to do this one by one. I go back to sculpt mode to shape the fingers. I need to rearrange the fingers. I'm moving away from the reference since this makes more sense to me. I respect the reference, but I'm looking for something closer, not perfect. My goal is to improve my skills by practicing. We have completed the blockout of the character. From here, what I like to do is to save different versions of the model. For instance, a blockout, then a sculpt, then a painted version, in case I have to go back to any of them. To save, I'm using a free add-on called Power Save. We can now make the leaf where the frog is sitting, so with Shift A, I will add a cylinder. I move it down with G, then I scale it to roughly have the same width to the leaf in the reference. With S and Z, I will reduce the height of the object. Remember that because of the position of the camera, this seems to have some rotation. In side view, we can see how some of the parts of the model are not touching the ground, so that is something that I will be fixing in a moment. Back to the cylinder, I apply the scale with Ctrl A and go to Edge Selection mode. I am planning to follow the reference, but I also freely make changes to the shape of the leaf by selecting edges and moving them. Let's add a subdivision modifier to make it less sharp. We need to stretch the shape to make it look better, so I will go to face selection mode. You also have it on the top. I will select the top face and pressing I can inset, creating a boundary loop. I repeat the same to the bottom face. I add more subdivisions. We can make the edges sharper by adding loops with Ctrl R. I like how it was, so I will just go back. I'm going to make it smooth with right click then shade smooth. For adjustments, I will need to hide this object, so I will rename it with F2 and call it floor. It is time to adjust the rest of the model. I will begin by selecting the body and the floor and pressing / to isolate the view on these two objects. We can obviously see that the part that needs more adjustments are the legs. I will need to change the character a bit to make my corrections. To make it easier, I select all the parts of the leg, leaving the thighs for last. When this is done, I can then press Ctrl P to parent the objects. Now, if I move this part of the leg, the rest will move with it. I can now bring it all down until it touches the floor. The model now is not matching the reference, but we can easily fix this in Sculpt mode. All is looking good, so I can do some final tweaking to the fingers. Here is our blockout, which looks pretty nice and gives us a strong foundation for when we start adding details and refining. We can save this and call it done. And that's it guys for the part 1 of this video series. In the part 2, we will join the body parts and do some sculpting and add details to our model, so stay tuned for more. If you enjoyed the content, please consider to like, share and subscribe, and if you have any suggestions to improve the channel, please let me know down below in the comment section. Thank you for watching and see you soon.